Moving to New York City was a dream come true for me. But 7 years later, there are days where I wish I could just get the hell out of here. I have both idealized New York and hated it at times. So for having been on both ends of the spectrum, I think I have a pretty objective view of the city. So this video is my final take on whether you should or you should not make the move for yourself. I'm someone who really values critical thinking and who values nuance. And in this video, you'll get my perspective as a 28-year-old French expatriate who's lived on a pretty wide range of salaries in 4 different apartments, worked a corporate marketing job, and now building a new creative career in my late 20s. To sum it up, my voice is one of many, and I hope that my perspective can help you and guide you. Whether you live here, want to move here, or are just wondering why the hell would anyone want to spend this much money to live here? So today, I'm going to take you on a little walk, a little trip around the city, and we're going to talk about all the different things that you should consider if you want to move to New York City. And this isn't going to be a video full of stats or numbers because honestly, you can Google the average price for rent or the subway maps in 2 seconds. This is going to be more of a friend-to-friend conversation, as in you're a really good friend of mine considering moving to the city, and I'm giving you all the real, raw, and unfiltered details. All right, but first, let's go get some coffee. So let's start by addressing the elephant in the room, aka the cost of living. It is universally agreed upon that New York City is expensive, but one thing that I will always say is that you shouldn't let other people's cost of living impact what you think that you can live with, and that applies to New York City. One thing that I will never do is tell people how much I think they should have to live here. When I first moved to New York City, a lot of people were telling me random numbers of how much I should make at minimum if I wanted to live here, and I found that to be very frustrating. Just to give you a number, when I first moved here, I made $30K a year just after being an intern, basically my first job. I'm not going to tell you that it wasn't tight and it wasn't tough, but it was possible and I did it. I have a lot of videos on my channel about budgeting. I think the most important is to really think about what you want to prioritize and what's the most important to you, and make a budget. Give yourself a certain amount for each categories and save on, things that don't bring you joy. Like if you feel like going out and spending a bunch of money on drinks is not necessarily serving you, then maybe cut on that. Maybe find activities that are cheaper or free that fulfill you to fill your time, instead of focusing on what everyone is telling you that you should be doing when you live in New York City. I really always emphasize on living a simple, kind of frugal life. So obviously I'm a little biased here, but I think the most important takeaway is that you can live here with a lot less than people are telling you. There's obviously going to be high costs that are fixed, like your rent. We'll talk about that in detail a little bit later in the video, but there is different price points for everything, and you can find your price points. You'll also see that once you move here and you find your neighborhood and you get to know your area specifically, you have to kind of do the work to find your spots. You'll find what I would call your low price, high reward spots, whether it's a little movie theater that you like, a little cheap restaurant where the food is absolutely delicious. For me, those are kind of like my lifelines. The bottom line here, and that's kind of my take, is that learning to live with less and learning to live simply is kind of the key to freedom and happiness. As dramatic as that sounds, I really do think that New York City is amazing in that way because it can teach you that. And once you've acquired that skill of being happy and not feeling frustrated with living simply, I feel like you'll always be happy with what you have. When you move to the city, you will be surrounded by people who make a lot more money than you and with people who make a lot less money than you. But most people will compare themselves to people who make more. Believe it or not, I've had people tell me that how much I make is barely enough, is considered minimum wage in New York City, and I choose not to listen to this because I choose to feel like how much I make is rich for me. I choose to focus on the fact that I have everything that I need, that I'm able to enjoy my life and enjoy some of the things that I love the most while still being able to save up. I live life to the fullest and I have a pretty tight budget, at least what some people would consider a pretty tight budget, which to me feels very abundant. And there's also people who make double, triple what I make and live paycheck to paycheck. So really goes to show. So let's talk about transportation. I'm gonna tell you about my favorite means of transportation, and I guess I'm gonna rank them by order of preference. So my absolute favorite mean of transportation in New York City is what I'm doing right now. And if you move here, you're going to likely do a lot of walking because it's a very walkable city, and it's also very nice to walk around in New York. At least I think so. And as someone who is from Europe, I honestly don't know if I could live in another city in America because the walkability is really something that I value. And most of the time, I'll choose to walk over taking the train or another mean of transportation. Basically, there's times where you'll say things like, I'm just gonna walk a little bit and then I'll take the train home, and just find yourself walking all the way home because it feels so nice. My second favorite mean of transportation is not the most used or the most convenient, but it is the best experience in my opinion, and that is taking the ferry. Specifically, if you live in Brooklyn, it's a really nice and pleasant way to get into Manhattan. It's very clean, it's really fast if the route makes sense for you, and it's probably the safest mean of transportation in New York. In position 3 is actually the bus. I much prefer taking the bus over the train. Obviously, when it makes sense, it's, in my experience, a lot safer than the train. And I also prefer it because instead of being underground, you can actually look at the sights. It's just much more entertaining than taking the train. And then finally, number 4, my least favorite mean of transportation, although the one that I take the most because it is still kind of the most convenient, and that is the subway. The subway is not always the most pleasant experience. I'm sure I'm not the first person you're hearing that from, and I probably won't be the last. It can be pretty gross, feel pretty unsafe, although I've personally never had a really bad experience. I've seen things. We've all seen things. I would not recommend taking the train after midnight. Really try to avoid it. If you find yourself out and about later than that, especially if you're by yourself, I would highly recommend either taking the bus if it's available or taking an Uber. It sucks, it's expensive, but sometimes it's just the best thing to do. Can't really talk about New York City without talking about the culture. I am currently sitting at the Met, which is literally one of my favorite places to hang out, and I feel like there are no better place than here to talk about culture in New York City. One of the things that drew me to New York the most is the culture, and obviously there are plenty of other places where there is an abundance of culture and art, but I think there are things that make culture in New York City so unique and so inspiring. And for me, that was really the first time I set foot in New York was really what fully drew me in and almost instantly convinced me that I needed to live here and be here. There is obviously an abundance of museums in New York, but what I specifically love is that there is a lot of free resources. So, or, almost free. The Met, for example, or the Museum of National History are pay what you want for New York residents. So as long as you have a New York ID, you can pay whatever you want. I just paid $5. That seems fair to me. Sometimes I'll pay $1. I've asked, and the minimum is 1 cent. So just so you know, it's basically free. I think that's incredibly important to have free access to culture, and I love the fact that some museums in New York do that. But the culture in New York City goes way beyond just museum. Art is basically everywhere here, and for me, this city is an endless source of inspiration. Whether you're an artist or not, I find that it's so incredibly important to feel inspired in your day-to-day life. And in New York, every little corner of the city feels like it's filled with history and details, and there's so much going on at all times, and the city has lived and been through so much that I find that there's just an energy here that makes it so vibrant and gives you so much energy. There's also, wherever you go, always something going on. There's always an event, a random music event, a random food festival. You'll just be walking around and randomly stumbling upon a free concert. You'll never be bored, basically. What I will say, though, is that you need to actively take advantage of all the arts and culture that are available here, because a lot of people end up living here and kind of taking it for granted and not taking advantage of all of the things that we have access to. All right, so I think I've made my point on how New York City is an endless source of culture and art. So let's just walk around the museum for a little bit. The Met is surely one of the most beautiful places in New York City, in my opinion, especially on a day like today. This is like the most perfect day ever. It's almost like I planned this a little bit. It's actually starting to get really crowded outside, which is very typical of a beautiful, gorgeous day like this. So right now, we're gonna head into Central Park because I want to talk to you about the people of New York City.
When the sage brings the rite of spring, morning dove and the sparrows sing, through the light that the sun will bring, reborn.
Oof, I had to grab some water because it's starting to get really hot in here. So let's talk about people. And in this category, I'm actually going to talk about 3 subcategories, which are community, like more like friendship and building community, networking, and dating. Because I have a lot of things to debunk about dating in New York. So first of all, building community. Making friendships is not the easiest thing to do in New York, because despite the fact that it is a highly dense, highly populated city, you'll likely meet a lot of people, but it can be challenging to make deep and meaningful connection and long-lasting connection. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But it is not impossible. It took me a while to figure out the best way to make friends and to make long-lasting friendships. And my biggest tip is to really lean into activities and things that you are passionate about and that you already love to do, and meet people through that passion. Because without something that binds people together, humans by themselves have a hard time building connections. At least that's what I've found in living here and just in my life in general. It's really hard to get people together when there's not a thing that brings them together. So for example, I talk a lot about this on my channel. A couple years ago, I started playing pool because one of my friends played pool. We ended up meeting a lot of people through playing pool because we just fell in love with the game. And once you keep showing up to the same places over and over to do the same activity, eventually you end up being friends. And you end up really building those connections because of repetition. And that might seem like a simplification, but honestly, that's kind of what, for example, university or school did when we were younger. We just kept showing up to the same place every day, having that one big thing in common, and ended up creating groups of friends. It could also be sports, like joining a sports team or signing up for a class that's every week or so. You'll meet your people because you'll meet your people doing something that you love doing. And also, just because you have that one thing in common doesn't mean that you'll have everything in common. And I would highly recommend that you stay open-minded. And what I mean by that is that I actually really think it's beneficial to hang out with people that don't have the same perspectives and the same mindsets in every aspect of life, because that's kind of how you end up finding yourself in an echo chamber. And as someone who really values critical thinking and diversity and developing tolerance, I think it's very important to meet people and to be friends with people that don't agree with you on every single thing. Now let's talk about networking. Because of the high density, high population of New York City, that means that you have endless possibilities of meeting people in the context of work and of your career. Again, here, it requires work, but you have to really put yourself out there. Honestly, in New York, it feels like everyone is always working on something, especially if you're creative, but honestly, even if you aren't, there are people who are absolutely open to collaborating and working together to further their career. And you really shouldn't be afraid to reach out to people. Whether you literally go up to people in the streets, don't do it in a creepy way, and talk to them, or you find people on Instagram or on social media that you want to DM directly, do it. Really do it, because you never know when you're going to meet that one person who could change everything for you and for your career. The worst thing that could happen is rejection. It's a big city. You'll probably never see them again, or never see them if you reach out to them on social media. A few weeks ago, I made a video about wanting to pursue a dream of becoming a full-time photographer. And this girl, who is a model, DM'd me on Instagram saying that my message really, really resonated with her, and that she was a model and she was open to collaborating and or just hang out and grab coffee and just talk about the things that we have in common, because we did have a lot in common. And I thought that was absolutely amazing. I was so glad that she reached out, and we've been hanging out a lot. We've collaborated. We are planning on collaborating more, and through each other we'll likely meet even more people. And it's just so amazing how just someone having the courage of reaching out turned into a friendship and turned into endless possibilities. So you really have to take advantage of that, because things can move really fast and can happen really fast if you're willing to put yourself out there. The last thing I'm going to talk about on the topic of people is dating. I have a bone to pick with the way people talk about dating in New York City, because yes, the dating life is somewhat difficult in so many ways. A lot of people will make the argument that it's nearly impossible to find a long-term relationship or to find your forever partner, person, whatever you want to call it, here. And I strongly disagree. Because you absolutely can find the love of your life in the city. And there are people who are absolutely looking for that here. Not every single person is obsessed with their career and treating dating like it's transactional, and you will be able to find them if and only if you are very clear about what you want and very forward and not afraid to tell people what you want. That's going to require you to really cut the bullshit and really filter out the people that you know are not ready for a relationship. You know it. You know it. And if you want to follow all the red flags, that's probably going to be really fun and entertaining. I did it. I get it. The other thing is, in New York City specifically, we have an abundance of choice. And because of that, people are trying to find a person who checks every single one of their boxes. And I have found that that's just not how people work. You have to be open to compromising. You have to be open to meeting someone who's not exactly to a T what you've imagined in your head, because that person likely does not exist. Okay, so I know that so far I've mostly talked about things that are positive about living in New York City, but I don't want to make it sound like it's all rainbows and butterflies, because it definitely isn't. So let me talk about one massive thing that has made me hate the city at times. And I'm going to name this category sensory overload. When you're in New York City, it's a very noisy place, it's a very smelly place, and it's extremely populated. So there are times where it makes you feel like you can't escape it. The noise and the people and the smells and the trash everywhere can definitely feel overwhelming and a little suffocating at times. It's something that at times I have felt almost made me want to move out of the city. It definitely wears you out. When it comes to how gross and disgusting and how much trash there is on the streets, the city is trying to take some initiatives to fix those issues. They finally made it mandatory to have trash containers on trash day instead of literally putting trash bags on the sidewalk. But in my experience, it's still pretty gross. The containers get knocked over. So if you want to live here, you'll just have to accept that that's part of it. Whether it's outside or even sometimes in your apartment, you'll constantly be exposed to other people's noise and closeness. Like right now, it was really difficult for me to find a somewhat quiet spot and to find a little bit of, privacy to film this. And obviously I could be filming this in my apartment, but I'm just saying, like, it's really hard to find anywhere that's not filled with people. And the nicer the weather is, the more people there's going to be outside. And even when you're inside of your apartment, in a lot of cases, you'll feel very close to everybody still. I live in a fairly old building, and I honestly have heard it being the case also in newer buildings. You hear your neighbors a lot. You hear every single thing that our neighbors do and other people in the building. It really truly feels like you kind of have roommates even when you don't anymore. One thing that you should really prioritize when you move here is to find a neighborhood and an apartment that is quiet. And I'm going to give you a few tips on where to live and how to find an apartment and all that good stuff. But I think we should be doing that from the comfort of my apartment. So we're back home, we're all cozy. I made myself some tea, and we're gonna finish by talking about apartments. Where you live in the city is really going to shape your experience entirely. And I think that's one of the most important things to consider. So first of all, most people who move here will likely live with roommates, at least at first, especially if you're on a budget. Living with roommates can be one of the best things that ever happened to you, or it can be an absolute nightmare. And I speak from experience when I say that. One of the most important things to consider when you move in with roommates is whether your lifestyles match or not. You might think that you can live with people with different lifestyles from you, or that you won't care that much, but believe me, you will. Things like sleep schedules, cleanliness, social life, quiet hours, all of that is really something that you should consider and you should ask people about before moving in with them. Come up with questions that you'll ask people when you're either interviewed by people to be their new roommates or you're just looking for roommates. The easiest way to find an apartment, especially if you're young, you might not have the greatest credit score. You might be like me from another country, so you don't have a credit score at all. You might struggle with the traditional path to find an apartment and the traditional path of apartment applications. So what I did when I first moved here, and I actually did it twice, was to find a sublet, generally with other roommates, just looking for a room because one of their roommates moved out. And then when it was time to re-sign the lease, they just added me to the lease. That's how I got this apartment. I was first living with roommates and they did some background checks on me, but it wasn't as hard of a sell as if I was in competition with other people for an apartment that has tens or dozens of applications, because the landlord is just going to prioritize people who are already living here. The two best ways that I've found to find roommates or to find a sublet is the Roomie app and the Gypsy Housing Facebook group. Those are how I found all of my apartments since I moved to the city. Now, if you're not living with roommates or not planning on living with roommates, finding the right apartment becomes even more important because you're going to be locked in for a year lease. What I would recommend is that if you're not living here, if you've never lived here before, here again, I would recommend finding a sublet first or short-term lease. Find out more about the different neighborhoods, about the apartment itself. You might even have a possibility of re-signing or signing a lease on a sublet, because what seems like the perfect place for you to live on paper might just feel different on a day-to-day basis when you've lived there for a few weeks. In case I haven't said it enough already, New York City is extremely noisy and loud. In my experience, a quiet home isn't a luxury, it's necessary. And I say that as someone who lives in a somewhat quiet apartment, but we have our quirks, and we specifically have pretty loud neighbors, and we live in an old building, so that can get a tiny bit annoying, and that is totally an understatement. My point is, having a quiet home base is going to make a huge difference. At least finding an apartment that has a quiet bedroom. When you're viewing an apartment, you should ask about noise, whether it's to your future roommates or the real estate agent. They might not always be super honest with you about that, so signs that I would look for: a bedroom, for example, on the backyard side, not on the street side. Last floor apartments or higher floor apartments are going to be more quiet. Just look at your street in general. Is there a bar downstairs or across the street? Those might be red flags. And then generally, although that's not always the case, older apartments are going to have thinner walls. So you might ask your real estate agent the type of people who live here. Are they young? Do they party a lot? Again, here, you might not get all the information from them, but you can get a feel for it. Just pay a lot of attention. See if when you're viewing the apartment, you see other people in the building. Just things like that. Last but not least, let's talk about neighborhoods. Although, yes, rents are expensive in New York, don't look at the median rents in New York City. I feel like that's just an off-putting number, and it doesn't really mean much as an individual when you're going to look for an apartment. It's going to highly depend on the neighborhood. First of all, don't rule out the other boroughs. New York City is not just Manhattan, and you will have a New York City experience even if you don't live in Manhattan, believe me. But even within those boroughs, you're obviously going to have more expensive neighborhoods. Hi, Ziggy. So again here, really do your research. Ask people if you already know people who live here. Don't hesitate to reach out and ask questions. But most importantly, aside from the price aspect, you should definitely find a neighborhood that matches your rhythm of life. There are cheaper residential area. There are cheaper, more lively, dynamic areas. Prioritize finding a neighborhood based on your lifestyle, not whatever everyone is saying is the most hype neighborhood or the most aesthetically pleasing neighborhood. So, in case it wasn't obvious already, if you're seriously thinking about moving to New York City, I think you have your answer already. It is worth it. There's no right or wrong way to go here. There are a million ways to live here, to make it work, to carve your own path. And if for any reason you feel called to this city, even if it's not the most rational reason, I think you really owe it to yourself to try. For me, I think it was a bit of just the epic factor. I've always had a bit of a main character complex in me, and New York City kind of feeds that. It's not for everyone, but it definitely feels special in a way. If there's any of the topics that I mentioned today that you'd like me to dive deeper into or make a dedicated video about, please let me know in the comments. If you want more New York City tips and lifestyle content, don't forget to subscribe. I really hope you found this video helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.